In 1864, Elizabeth Packard was dragged from her home and locked in an insane asylum. Her diagnosis? She disagreed with her husband's religious views. For 3 years, she remained imprisoned without trial, without medical examination, without any legal recourse. But Elizabeth wasn't alone. That same year, another woman was committed for reading novels, another for imaginary female trouble, another for political excitement. These weren't rare cases. They were standard practice in Victorian America and Britain, where thousands of perfectly sane women were institutionalized for the crime of being inconvenient. But before diving deeper into this nightmare of medical abuse and legal powerlessness, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Every week, uncovering the darkest corners of history that your textbooks never mentioned. Stories that need to be told, no matter how disturbing they are. The law made this shockingly simple. A husband could have his wife committed with just 1 or 2 doctors' signatures, doctors he could choose and pay himself. No trial, no examination, no questions asked. Under the legal doctrine of coverture, married women had no separate legal identity. They couldn't own property, sign contracts, or even exist as legal persons. A prominent Victorian psychiatrist, Dr. John Connolly, admitted openly in his 1856 work, Treatment of the Insane Without Mechanical Restraints. A man could sign away his wife with less difficulty than he could sell his horse. Think about that. Less paperwork to lock up a wife than to sell livestock. The Married Women's Property Act wouldn't pass in England until 1870, and even then, it didn't protect women from involuntary commitment. In America, the situation varied by state, but most gave husbands absolute authority over their wives' freedom. Illinois law explicitly stated that married women could be committed to asylum solely on their husband's request, without evidence of insanity. The West Virginia Hospital for the Insane kept meticulous records from 1864 to 1889. The reasons for admission read like a dark satire, but they were deadly serious. Women were committed for novel reading, overstudy of religious subjects, political excitement, and bad company in books. The medical establishment genuinely believed women's brains were too delicate for intellectual stimulation. Dr. Edward Clark of Harvard Medical School published a widely read treatise in 1873, Sex in Education, or A Fair Chance for Girls, claiming that education would cause women's uteruses to atrophy. Thinking too much, he argued, literally redirected blood from their reproductive organs to their brains. But the most common reasons were even more absurd. Suppressed menstruation, 29 cases. Menstrual derangement, 71 cases. Change of life, meaning menopause, 15 cases. Childbirth, 24 cases. Simply existing as a biological woman was considered a form of insanity. The medical theories behind these diagnoses came from centuries of misogyny disguised as science. The concept dated back to ancient Greece, where Hippocrates coined the term hysteria, from the Greek word hystera, meaning uterus. Plato described the womb as an animal within an animal, desperate to bear children. If a woman remained childless too long, physicians believed her womb would wander through her body, pressing on organs and causing everything from anxiety to seizures. By the Victorian era, doctors had abandoned the wandering womb theory but kept the diagnosis. Dr. William Acton's 1857 book, The Functions and Disorders of the Reproductive Organs, became the standard medical text. He wrote that the majority of women, happily for them, are not very much troubled with sexual feeling of any kind. This belief that respectable women had no sexual desires became medical dogma. The symptoms of hysteria expanded to include practically anything: anxiety, insomnia, muscle spasms, shortness of breath, loss of appetite, irritability, depression, sexually forward behavior, sexually repressed behavior, and most tellingly, a tendency to cause trouble. Dr. Isaac Baker Brown, president of the Medical Society of London, had a special cure. Between 1859 and 1866, he performed clitoridectomies, surgical removal of the clitoris, on women and girls as young as 10. His 1866 book, On the Curability of Certain Forms of Insanity, Epilepsy, Catalepsy, and Hysteria in Females, detailed his procedures. One patient was sent to him, because she wanted a divorce under the new Divorce Act of 1857. Her husband claimed wanting a divorce was proof of insanity. After Brown's surgery, she was returned to her husband, cured. Another woman was operated on for masturbation, a third for forward behavior with her fiancé. Brown claimed a 70% success rate in curing insanity through genital mutilation. He was eventually expelled from the medical society, not for the procedures themselves, but for operating without proper consent and bringing negative publicity to the profession. The practice continued in America well into the 20th century. The last recorded clitoridectomy for hysteria in the United States was performed in 1948 on a 5-year-old girl whose parents complained she masturbated. The asylum experience itself was designed to break women's spirits. Admission procedures were deliberately humiliating. Women were stripped, examined intimately, and had their personal belongings confiscated. Their clothes were replaced with shapeless asylum uniforms. Their names were often replaced with numbers. Dr. S. Weir Mitchell's rest cure was particularly cruel. Women were isolated in dark rooms for weeks, forbidden to read, write, or even sit up. They were force-fed milk and eggs every 2 hours, gaining weight rapidly. Nurses were instructed not to speak to them. The treatment was designed to reduce women to an infantile state of dependence. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, author of The Yellow Wallpaper, underwent Mitchell's rest cure in 1887. She later wrote that it drove her so near the borderline of mental ruin that I could see over. Her story became a famous indictment of psychiatric treatment of women, but at the time, Mitchell was considered one of America's finest nerve specialists. Once inside an asylum, the treatments were essentially torture. The water cure involved more than just cold baths. Women were wrapped in freezing wet sheets and left for hours, a practice called packing. The sheets would shrink as they dried, constricting breathing and circulation. Some women were subjected to the surprise bath, suddenly dropped through a trapdoor into ice-cold water without warning. The rotating chair, invented by Dr. Benjamin Rush, ironically called the father of American psychiatry, spun patients at up to 100 revolutions per minute. The centrifugal force would cause them to vomit, defecate, and often lose consciousness. Rush believed this would correct the circulation in the brain. The tranquilizing chair was equally horrific. Women were strapped immobile for days, with a box placed over their heads to ensure complete sensory deprivation. They were only released for feeding and bathroom breaks. Dr. Rush wrote that after several days, even the most troublesome patients became remarkably obedient. Women who protested faced even worse punishment. Solitary confinement cells were often underground, without windows or heat. Women were chained to walls, left in their own waste, fed bread and water through slots. Some spent years in these conditions. The case files tell heartbreaking stories. Mary Rote was committed to Willard Asylum in 1889 for novel reading and desertion by husband. She died there 30 years later, having never been released. Her suitcase, discovered in 1995, contained pressed flowers, photographs of children she never saw grow up, and letters she was never allowed to send. With no oversight and women having no legal rights, sexual assault was endemic. Attendants, doctors, and male patients had unrestricted access to female wards. When women became pregnant, it was considered proof of their moral insanity and nymphomania, justifying harsher treatments. The Philadelphia Hospital for the Insane recorded 47 pregnancies among patients in 1878 alone, all blamed on the women's depraved nature. The statistics paint a damning picture. By 1880, women made up 60% of asylum populations despite being only 51% of the general population. In Massachusetts, the ratio was even worse. Women were 70% of asylum inmates by 1890. Once committed, women faced near impossible odds of release. The average stay for women was 7 years, compared to 3 for men, but averages hide the horror. At Willard Asylum, researchers found women who had been imprisoned for 50, 60, even 75 years for conditions like disappointed love or domestic trouble. The economic motivations were clear. Asylums received government funding per patient. More patients meant more money. Private asylums charged families hefty fees for keeping their troubled women. Dr. John Bucknell, visiting from England in 1876, wrote that American asylums had become a very profitable business, where cure is not the primary objective. The racial and class dimensions made everything worse. Black women were diagnosed with drapetomania, the mental illness of wanting to escape slavery. After emancipation, they were committed for not knowing their place. Immigrant women, especially Irish and Italian, were institutionalized at twice the rate of native-born Americans, often for the crime of not speaking English well. Poor women had no recourse at all. While wealthy families might eventually extract their relatives, working-class women simply disappeared into the system. The 1890 census listed over 100,000 women in American asylums. Most would die there. Dr. John Gray, superintendent of the Utica State Hospital, admitted in an 1884 report that many women are sent to us who are not insane, merely unwanted. He estimated that 30% of his female patients showed no signs of mental illness. But he continued accepting them, noting it was not our place to question the wisdom of commitments. Some women fought back brilliantly. Elizabeth Packard, after 3 years of imprisonment, didn't just win her freedom. She changed the law. During her trial in 1864, she presented her own defense, reading from the Bible and Constitution to prove her sanity. The jury took just 7 minutes to declare her sane. She spent the next 20 years campaigning for asylum reform. She published 4 books, including The Prisoner's Hidden Life, or Insane Asylums Unveiled, in 1868. She traveled across America, speaking to legislatures, organizing former patients, and exposing asylum abuses. By 1867, 4 states had passed Packard laws requiring jury trials before involuntary commitment. But the most explosive exposé came from journalist Nellie Bly. In 1887, she feigned insanity to get committed to the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island. Her series, 10 Days in a Madhouse, revealed women beaten with brooms, tied together with ropes, forced to eat spoiled food, and made to sit motionless on hard benches 14 hours a day. She found immigrants who didn't understand English, poor women whose families couldn't afford to keep them, and elderly women whose children wanted their inheritance. Bly's most disturbing discovery was how the asylum created insanity. She wrote, "What, excepting torture, would produce insanity quicker than this treatment? I would like the expert physicians to take a perfectly sane and healthy woman, shut her up and make her sit from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on straight-backed benches. Do not allow her to talk or move during these hours. Give her no reading, and let her know nothing of the world or its doings. Give her bad food and harsh treatment, and see how long it will take to make her insane." The public outcry from Bly's exposé led to increased funding and some reforms, but the fundamental system remained intact. Women continued to be committed for decades more. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, which opened in 1864, didn't close until 1994. Its final patients included women originally committed in the 1950s for promiscuity and lesbianism. The medical justification evolved, but never disappeared. When hysteria fell out of favor, new diagnoses took its place. Schizophrenia in the 1920s, depression in the 1930s, borderline personality disorder in the 1960s. Each generation found new ways to pathologize women's refusal to conform. Dr. Phyllis Chesler's groundbreaking 1972 book, Women and Madness, documented how the pattern continued. She found that women in the 1960s were still being institutionalized for sexual promiscuity, lesbianism, and refusing to perform housework. They were given electroshock therapy for depression caused by abusive marriages. They were lobotomized for being too aggressive. The last woman diagnosed with hysteria in America was released in 1978. The diagnosis wasn't officially removed from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual until 1980. But even then, it was simply renamed histrionic personality disorder, from the Latin word for actor, implying women were performing their distress. The international scope was equally horrifying. In Ireland, the Magdalene Laundries imprisoned fallen women, meaning unwed mothers, rape victims, orphans, and women deemed too pretty or flirtatious. They were forced into slave labor, washing laundry for churches and businesses. The last Magdalene laundry closed in 1996. Survivors reported beatings, starvation, and sexual abuse. Many never left alive. In Australia, unmarried mothers were forcibly committed to Goodna Mental Asylum well into the 1970s. In Japan, the mental hygiene law allowed families to commit female relatives without medical examination until 1987. In Switzerland, women could be institutionalized for licentiousness until 1981. The Soviet Union used psychiatric hospitals to silence female dissidents. China's Ankang system still allows families to commit relatives without due process. The World Health Organization estimates that women worldwide are twice as likely as men to be involuntarily committed, even today. The legacy persists in subtler forms. Women's pain is still dismissed more often than men's. Studies show women wait an average of 65 minutes in emergency rooms, compared to 49 minutes for men with identical symptoms. Women with heart attacks are twice as likely to be misdiagnosed with anxiety. Women with endometriosis wait an average of 7 years for diagnosis, often told their pain is normal or psychological. The term hysterical remains a weapon. Hillary Clinton was called hysterical for showing emotion during the 2016 campaign. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was labeled hysterical for her passionate speeches about climate change. Any woman who raises her voice risks the same dismissal that sent their great-grandmothers to asylums. Medical textbooks still underrepresent female anatomy. Most drug trials still primarily use male subjects. Heart attack symptoms are still taught based on male presentation. The medical establishment that once removed women's clitorises to cure hysteria now routinely dismisses conditions affecting primarily women: fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, autoimmune disorders, as psychological. The economic exploitation continues too. Private psychiatric facilities still profit from involuntary commitments. Insurance companies pay thousands per day for inpatient treatment. In 2019, Universal Health Services, America's largest psychiatric hospital chain, paid $127 million to settle charges of holding patients against their will to maximize insurance payments. The majority of victims were women. The intersection of race, class, and gender makes certain women especially vulnerable. Black women are more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia instead of depression for identical symptoms. Native American women can be committed to psychiatric facilities by tribal councils without legal representation. Undocumented immigrant women in detention centers are routinely given psychotropic drugs without consent. Trans women face particular horrors. Until recently, many countries required sterilization and psychiatric evaluation to change legal gender. Some still do. The diagnosis of gender identity disorder pathologized their very existence, echoing the Victorian belief that deviation from gender norms was insanity. But women continue to fight back. The psychiatric survivor movement, led primarily by women, has pushed for patients' rights and informed consent. Former patients have created support networks, published memoirs, and lobbied for reform. The motto "Nothing about us without us" demands that those who've experienced psychiatric treatment have a voice in shaping policy. Legal victories accumulate slowly. The Olmsted decision in 1999 affirmed the right to community-based treatment instead of institutionalization. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, ratified by 182 countries, prohibits forced psychiatric treatment. But implementation remains inconsistent, and many women still lack basic protections. The real victory would be addressing the root causes: the poverty that makes women vulnerable, the violence that traumatizes them, the inequality that limits their choices. Instead of pathologizing women's responses to oppression, we could change the conditions that oppress them. But that would require acknowledging that the problem was never wandering wombs or female hysteria. The problem was, and remains, a society that cannot tolerate women's full humanity. This isn't ancient history. Women alive today remember being institutionalized for being gay, for wanting careers, for leaving abusive husbands. The last woman committed for hysteria might be watching this video. The last Magdalene laundry survivor is younger than many people's mothers. Just 150 years ago, reading books could lock a woman away forever. Disagreeing with a husband was insanity. Having a period was a mental illness. This was the law. This was medicine. This was normal. And in too many ways, in too many places, it still is. Every admission record from those asylums represents a woman whose life was stolen. A woman who was told her thoughts, her feelings, her very existence was a form of madness. Their stories demand to be remembered, not as curiosities from a barbaric past, but as warnings about a pattern that continues. What aspect of this history disturbs you most? The legal powerlessness, the medical torture, or the fact that some of these practices continued into living memory? Comment below with your thoughts. And if this shocked you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Every week, uncovering the dark truths of history that textbooks won't tell you. The stories that need to be remembered, no matter how uncomfortable they make us. Because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.